Okay, good evening. I think we'll get started. I'm Dr. Mark Gallimore, your moderator for this evening. The Conversations on AI series, and I know a lot of attendees have attended some previous ones, but real quick, is organized by the Canisius AI and Society Initiative, a group of offices, centers, and faculty interested in practical responses to the arrival and development of generative AI, by which we really first and foremost mean these AI chatbots. This includes the Center for Analytics and Data Ecosystems, CCADE, my Center for Online Learning and Innovation, the Quantitative Sciences Department and its cybersecurity program, as well as a variety of faculty across various disciplines. Our events are made possible with the generous support of Canisius University's School of Education and Human Services, the Whaley School of Business, and the College of Arts and Sciences. Tonight, we're focused on how and why we teach students to write, perhaps adjacent topics such as reading, as we consider possibilities and problems posed by generative AI that are now widely available. I use the term consumer items. As a historian, I'm particularly invested in this topic, both as a historian of technology and as someone who teaches through lots of reading and writing, hopefully. Our panel features Colin Dabkowski. Colin is in his 5th year teaching Alden High School, where he teaches English 12, creative writing, acting, and multimedia production. He is also the advisor of Alden High School's theater club, its Gender-Sexuality Alliance, and its creative writing club. Before becoming a teacher, he spent 12 years as an art critic for the Buffalo News. Dr. Graham Stowe is assistant professor of English here at Canisius University and director of the Canisius Writing Center. He has taught a variety of university courses focused on writing pedagogy, American literature, cultural studies, and Harry Potter. His research currently focuses on writing pedagogy and Paulo Freire's theories on education, the relationship between the two. I think I've characterized that correctly. Thank you both. Let me just start by saying thank you both for your time and attention to this topic and our gathering tonight, especially as we grow perilously close to semester's end and all that entails. So let's start by pointing out both of you participated in last year's Conversations on AI series at different events. So what have you seen that's changed over the last year in this relationship between AI chatbots that are available or other AI tools and writing pedagogy? Colin, you want to kick us off?
Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I want to say that first. This is something I think and read and write and speak about all the time because it's in my classroom every day. And so it's nice to have a forum where educators and education adjacent people can kind of talk about how this is manifesting in the classroom. I really appreciate that opportunity. In response to your question about how things have changed, I think there's a lot of ways, but I think what I've seen in my building and in my profession, I belong to the Western New York Network of English Teachers. We talk about AI a lot. We had a conference this fall where it was a major topic of discussion. The resistance to its use as a tool is declining. I think we initially saw quite a bit of resistance, some of it based in legitimate reasons and some of it maybe a little bit knee-jerk. But I think we have learned in the last year that AI is definitely not going away. It's a feature of our schools now. So the question is not, what to do about its existence, but how to navigate it, which is exactly what we're doing here tonight. So I've been glad to see the people's guards drop a little bit, and my fellow educators kind of come to terms with the fact that this is a tool and it does have positive uses. So we should, ideally be focusing on what those positive uses are and how to develop good habits around AI use in the classroom.
Graham, have you had any thoughts on how the situation's evolved over the last year?
Students are using it very, very openly and freely around the Canisius Writing Center and on campus. And you can walk through the library and see that, ChatGPT or Claude will be pulled up um, on their computers, just uh, ready to go. And my tutors will talk about have multiple tabs, and one will have a Google Doc, and one will have one of the chatbots. And so I agree with Colin insofar as that there's a um, wide acceptance of it among certainly among students. I have not seen the same kind of acceptance from higher education faculty that he's noting, and I don't know if that's because the gears of higher education turn very, very slowly, or we're all very stubborn, or all of those things. Um, so that on my like off the top of my head, it's kind of the things that's that strike me of late, and then they're also very good. They do a good job mimicking a first year freshman English class. Uh, and I still don't. Mark and Tyler have heard me say this many times. I still don't know exactly what to do with them. But that's kind of where I am.
So are there, if we're, I'm really interested to hear. I do remember conversations we had back in 2023 about student resistance, which maybe came as a bit of a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, with the sort of just this assumption that young people will automatically embrace technology type of thing. Um, if that's going away, um, are we seeing other sorts of ways that we can think about like different students reacting differently to AI? Are you seeing different behaviors among students with respect to AI? Colin?
I would say for sure. I mean, you still have the students who, I teach a college level English class of 12th graders, for example, who many of whom are resistant to using AI at all. They don't have an option in my class. I require them to use it for certain assignments and under certain guidelines. And so, yes, you have those traditional students who feel that it is cheating to use any kind of AI or generative AI in their writing assignments, particularly. Um, but I've had some success, and I would not call myself an evangelist for this technology by any means. I am an early adopter of pretty much everything, but I do see, lots of downsides. But for the most part, I want my students to see it like I see it, which is as a tool with good and bad, with pros and cons, and able to identify the pros and apply them to what they're doing as students. So I've seen some resistance among my upper level students for the same reason I think many university professors are resisting it, because they see it as a way as something that does not help them develop their critical thinking and writing skills, and they view writing quite correctly, I think, as essential to their development as human beings. And so those students view ChatGPT and other chatbots as kind of an incursion into that idea of writing's centrality to our life. And I feel that too, like as a former journalist. But on the flip side, most of my students that are not that top 5% of academically hyper-focused students who are resistant to it are now have come around to being able to use it, not necessarily to complete their assignments, but to help them think through it, to help with ideation, to help with the crisis of staring at a blank page, which we're all familiar with as writers, getting over that hump, and then also as a kind of way to get feedback on their writing if they have a particular goal in mind. So I'm seeing most students quickly embracing AI as a tool to help them accomplish something, even if that something is a standard 10-page paper. So yeah, my answer I think would be, yeah, you still have pockets of resistance among students, but for the most part, Students, I think, are coming to embrace it, like they embraced the calculator, in the 60s, what have you.
So you're finding that maybe resistance where it still resides is generally students that have greater confidence in their own writing, their writing skills, reading comprehension. They may see more value in writing as thinking or something to that effect, and they don't
Yeah.
want that process necessarily. They don't see a need to disturb that or to interfere with that.
Yeah. But there are very few students who see writing as that central, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when they come along, you throw a parade in their honor because it's so great to have them. But it's not as if they're, the majority of our population here at Alden High
Yeah.
School, any high school. And yeah, I share their love for the written word, but I'm a lot more adventurous when it comes to using AI to improve it.
Among your students who've embraced it a little more, I don't want to say enthusiastically, but however they've embraced it, are you seeing some students do peculiarly different things with it than others? Like, are there students who are, they bounce ideas off of it, and then there's other students who are all ideas people, but they just want help, and they almost use it as a kind of a sentence thesaurus or
Yeah, I mean those are high academic achievers that I have in smatterings of in my different classes. Like, I'll take a multimedia production, for example. This is basically a video journalism class. My students use it pretty freely to come up with questions for their interview subjects, because it is hard to come up with a great question, and research, of course, shows that like student generated questions are one of the great precursors to great discussions and deep learning that comes from those kinds of discussions. So we go through, how to formulate great questions, but the fact of the matter is they do get stuck. They need feedback, and they maybe need a jumping off point. So my journalists use it to come up with lists of questions, which they then go through and add personality to, because they arrive very personality free, as you may have detected from a lot of like chatbots. So that's one use that I've seen that's pretty common. They'll submit their writing to it, news articles, and they'll ask for feedback on transitions, or I ask them to prompt the chatbot for feedback on 3 specific things, much like I would provide writing feedback. And often they'll ask for help in those areas, and they'll act quite a bit like a writing tutor, and I think do a pretty good job at it. So they'll use it in that way. And then for sure there's students who just wholesale, have the chatbot write their essay for them. But I'm lucky enough, I have few enough students where I know all of their individual writing styles from like written tests that I do early in the semester. So I know when it's written by a chatbot, for the most part, unless they're really sophisticated at prompting it. That being said, I'm sure there's some that slip through the cracks. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, they use it in a lot of different ways. I do have a couple of projects that I can show, if we get to it, down the road in this conversation, about ways they've used it. They've used it for creating art, which I think is pretty cool. And also for our website, we're basically a video journalism class. So we have YouTube spit out the transcript, because they do all the writing and the reporting themselves that goes into the videos. But they don't really have time, nor do I want to teach them how to like edit a WordPress website. So I just have AI make an article out of their video, because I think they did the work of the video. That they did all the writing that went into it, and AI is just translating it to a different medium, and I find that to be a legitimate use of it. So our whole website is AI generated off of video transcripts. So I could go on. There's lots of different ways that my students have been using it.
Graham, do you have a sense of how you would categorize different student uses of AI in the writing center, or just in the writing that there's student writing that comes before you and your team?
Yeah, my sense right now is that there's not a lot of people at the college level, both at least not in the the immediate like humanities fields, that are using it in the way that Colin's talking about. I think most of us, at least at Canisius, are super resistant to having students using it. I don't think that that means there's not legitimate uses. I think it means that in our English department for sure, and probably in um, history and philosophy and religious studies. I can't speak for those departments specifically. Mark may be able to speak a little for history. Is that we kind of like when students stare at the blank page, that there's something productive in struggling with coming up with an idea and finding the way to what they think about a particular topic, or about a poem, or about an essay that we've assigned. Um, I do see the generative AI as a way to sort of to jumpstart some of that, and that is a seems like a perfectly valid use as long as it's not the first thing students go to. Like I want students to struggle a little, and then if they're really, really, really stuck and they just don't know what to say about something, then that really isn't that much different than talking to a professor or a friend about a topic and saying, well, what do you think? Like, where do you think I could go with this? I think there's ways that students don't think about that they should try before they do go to that. I think students should write. One of my favorite essays about writing is Anne Lamont's shitty first drafts. And I know a lot of you have heard me talk about it, is that first drafts are bad. And so you got to write something bad before you can write something good. And so letting yourself be wrong is I think, an important skill to develop, ideas and things like that. That said, like if if businesses or business majors or people want to use a AI to write a memo, or if a professor wants to is having trouble, we're long-winded types, and so like it might be a useful thing to say, well, I can't talk about this particular essay without talking about it for 5 or 6 pages, and my students need one. Like that seems like a good use to kind of trim something down. But if you ask Mark Gallimore, for example, about public transit in Pittsburgh, you're not going to get a short answer, and and that's good. I love to hear Mark talk about public transit. Um, uh,
I have asked ChatGPT for advice on cutting down my class lectures
yeah.
to make room for, my students and I are doing simulation, sort of serious games type of things in my history class. And full disclosure, I have given it like lecture notes and said, please, I can't talk at them for as long as I do. I
You
need
don't have
help.
time.
Help me dig out. I can't decide what needs to go. And it's actually, it wasn't perfect, but it did give me some good ideas about, look, you can probably cut this out because it's kind of out there on a limb type of thing. So yeah, I recommend it for that. Yeah. And every historian should always look for opportunities to cut down on lectures. So yeah.
So that's kind of my position hasn't changed a ton since last fall. The English department at Canisius has a statement that we've asked all of our English professors and adjuncts to include about the importance of developing their own work, and uh, you know, especially in a class like English 111, which is the equivalent of everyone else's 101 or whatever, or it's the first semester course. Like I want students to, write something bad on the way to writing something good. Um, uh, and I don't know where the line is though. Like at what point do, you let a student deal with it? And then I think part of what Colin's pointing to is this kind of, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, is this kind of question about, this thing is there and students are going to use it in the in the workforce or the real world, which is not a thing because college is also real. Um, but like where do you decide where that line might be? You know, I think most of our honors thesis writers, our professors would still say that that's to not do it. But, in a um, technical technical communication class or a coding class, that might be a place to use it. And deciding where that is um, a is probably a moving target for everybody.
I think it's a lot about writing with the so-called practical application, like a
Mm.
journalism or technical writing, things like that. The use cases are pretty clear, and I think we're already seeing a lot of, for better or worse, a lot of AI generated content out there in those areas,
Mhm.
and that's kind of disturbing because it makes those areas even less creative than they already were. Um, so I don't necessarily love like a blanket suggestion to use AI.
Mhm.
I think it's a question of what, being able to more clearly answer for our students, what is writing for? Like, why do we do it? Um, what are the liberal arts for? Um, and I find myself conflicted about that too, because I teach, 1984 remains one of my favorite books. And it's, common to teach in high schools, but it's all about the limitation of language, the truncation of language, and the reduction of even the possibility for creativity. So
Mhm.
I see that risk, in the AI technologies, the very technologies I'm asking my students to navigate. And it sort of feels like a little bit of a betrayal of my education. But then I see the practical things that it can enable my students to do, and I find myself living right on that line that you talked about, because it lets them, it enables them to do non projects that are not writing centric. It allows them to do a lot more. It helps them be more organized when we do project-based learning in our classroom. For example, right now we're doing a project based sort of several week project in which we're exploring our current ELA curriculum and detecting holes in it. And so we're cataloging what's on the curriculum currently, detecting what voices are not there, and then students are going out to read books that they'll then propose to the Board of Education. So AI is helping us organize and analyze our curriculum, right, in almost a not a scientific way, but in a more organized way than my frazzled English teacher brain would like make possible. So this is really helping me do this project, which is going to actually help me expand our curriculum with more voices and different, and more creative choices for students who feel very bogged down by, you know, um, Grapes of Wrath or whatever, the books that we have on our curriculum from a gazillion years ago, which are great. But so it enables me to organize and to help my students organize these project-based experiences. It helps us produce, like I said, our website, and various kinds of media production work that we do is not strictly like, I don't know, it's not like a college literature class necessarily.
Mhm.
Um, so I feel myself very torn between those two things.
I think that's a clear distinction that we should make between what you do in high school and what we do. Like you're far less siloed than we are
Right.
in the kinds of things that students need to be able to leave your classes doing because they're not all necessarily going to go to college. They're not and they might want to, if you go to work in a business right after you finish high school, you might need to crank out something fast and you know more power to you. You got to get a paycheck, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to help students navigate it when we don't really know how to navigate it ourselves. So there's a couple touchstones that I use rather clunkily, as I use any touchstone that I find, because that's my teaching style, clunky. But one of them is from AJ Giuliani, and it's just this like very simple stoplight philosophy on different on assignments. So red light is like, please do not use AI at all on this assignment. You are there to struggle with the blank page. Um, Yellow is ask me if you want to use it, and I will either like thumbs up or thumbs down that request, and you have to explain how you're going to use it, and I want to see how you're navigating it. And green is like go crazy, have fun, see what it does and how you can use it. So that's been good because it's allowed my students to reflect on their own use of AI. And I have included in some assignments like a reflection on how much AI they used. I don't know if anybody would be interested in seeing that system or me sharing some student work, but I could do that certainly if that was something that you were interested in seeing. I don't know.
If you wanted to share some of that, we'd be sort of interested in it. I am fascinated because I will say, teaching at the university level, just a single history class, that I'm struggling with how to, I have assignments. I'm not ready to give them up that are basically AI prohibitive, but I would like to also incorporate ways of possibly moving some amount of AI into what we're doing. I think you're doing this interesting thing where you're giving students a chance to try on other parts of the process than strictly composition, right? So the AI is going to take over some of the content generation or composition, or however you want to say this, so that your students get a chance to, at a formative time where they can just, like they may go to college, but they get to try out different parts of the production process for producing a creative, a multi-piece creative work with many moving parts. And that can help them determine, am I going to major in this or am I going to major in that? Even though I want to stay in media or in the liberal arts or in some sort of creative area, I'm not going to go full. I'm from a family of engineers, so I'm not saying engineers aren't creative, but I'm not going to go into engineering because I want to stay in some world where I'm doing some amount of writing and I'm also bringing together composed works type of thing. So I'm asking myself, how in history classes do I explore other parts of the process, so to speak, possibly by having AI do some of that kind of work.
Okay, well, that didn't work. I'm not going to try that again.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Zoom is apparently struggling tonight. So
Anyway, so I'll just talk about it super briefly. Essentially, like one assignment, I give my kids articles of the week that they're supposed to annotate and process, discuss, in Socratic seminars and things like that. So I give them one on AI, and I ask them to reflect on, and the article was about how AI is really not a great writer. Not far from it, actually. It's really just bad at being creative and interesting. And then I told them they could use AI. It was like a green light assignment. So I put the key at the top on most of my assignments, and it's red light, yellow light, green light. This was a green light, so they're encouraged to use AI in their first response. Then they had to write a reflection on how they used AI in the second response. And some of the things that came back were really interesting, and they appreciated the opportunity to be able to reflect on that in a very meta way. And one kid, I'm just going to read from his response super briefly. He said he used it to write the entire first response. It's very dumb for a student to ask AI to write their entire essay for them. I love the idea of ChatGPT and use it often, but typically for an assignment like this, I wouldn't touch it. To complete an assignment that needs creativity and thought put into it, AI is useless. I also didn't really feel like I learned anything when I did it. So to me, that was valuable. Other kids used it in ways that were less write the essay for me and more help me think of ideas, and they had a more positive, reflection on that process. But for most of my assignments, we're in the middle where I sort of ask them to ask me first. And hopefully they I try to build, as we all do, relationships enough where I hope they trust me enough to tell me the truth. Some of them don't, how that goes. But most of them will take that seriously and come to me and say, I want to use it for this reason, or I want it to give me feedback on this. Can I do it? And I say, yeah, absolutely. Because I want to see how that works too. So that's been I think it's been helpful to just be honest and open with them about my own lack of knowledge and wanting to understand how they're using it. And I think that what the outcome is is that they have like a healthy skepticism towards it, but they are not like running away from it. So that's kind of the best thing that I could hope for my students, to be skeptical about everything around them, not cynical, but skeptical about everything. And, so I'm trying to foster that connection to AI for them to view it not as some panacea or some solution to all their problems, but a potential tool with built-in pitfalls.
Graham, have you done any sort of experimentation with having students experiment with AI? Even on a level of, you don't really know because I've done a little bit of this in my history class. I don't really know where this is going or how I'm going to sort of, I'm like contractually obligated to apply a grade at the end of this, but sort of that kind of experimentation with writing, or maybe unintentionally experimented with it, if you've had students admit to it and they had sort of an outcome that was interesting.
The most interesting thing I've heard lately wasn't in my class, it was in a creative writing class where it, I mean, I guess there's probably someone somewhere that will one day write a novel that is fed through a series of prompts, that are like a series of, I would imagine, sophisticated questions, and then this will have to be when it gets better at communicating. But Mick Cochran just last week had a student in his creative writing class have several. He sent it to me to ask if I thought it was AI, and it had these phrases that were just dropped in. We've all seen them, like as if they came from nowhere. One of them was the phrase "barren in Denmark," and it was not, it had nothing to do with the country of Denmark or anything. It was just I mean, it was pretty clearly AI generated. It was clunky prose and transitionless, and then there was a portobello mushroom came up that was not involved in the story. Like, so that kind of thing, like students find that interesting. Like if in my upper division composition classes, I've many of them are going on to be high school teachers, and so I've introduced the stuff to them so that they can have some sense of what might happen. And like, and I've done the stuff that a lot of you have done, where you just put like, tell me, the history of the French Revolution in 500 words, as if that's possible. But like, and it'll crank something out that sounds like a 10th grader, and they then are terrified. But I hope that they have colleagues like Colin who can sort of help them navigate this process as their first year teachers. My my first year classes, we have an almost all red light policy. We really want those students to write their both their low stakes essays or journal entries and their formal work themselves. And I've had a few that I think are not writing them themselves, but mostly we've also done a decent job, I think, writing like assignments that are difficult to use. And either in I mean, we're very used to writing like there's the essay that you can't find online, like that people used to get at like 1-800 free essays or whatever. And so we've kind of adapted that, a lot of us, to an AI world where I had a journal entry I wrote recently that navigated this by asking it to put two authors in a coffee shop having a conversation, and which sounds like grist for an AI mill, but AI can't do it. They just can't figure out how these two particular, it's really the articles I want to have a conversation, not the authors, but they can't, they don't know the pieces well enough to do it. And that seems to work pretty well if the things are under copyright, and they haven't been stolen. So
Yeah, I think that's like, to me, I have such a, I feel lucky I have a lot of freedom to do projects that are not, just writing based. And
Mm.
I feel like I should turn in my writer card because like I don't do that many papers anymore. And even without AI, I wouldn't, because I do a lot of podcasts and media making and real world projects. And so I think what I'm excited about is that AI is moving us away from like the 11th grade Regents exam, five paragraphs, five paragraph essay formula that is for sure the basis of a lot of college papers, and it's useful because it's a good structure to help people build arguments and think through ideas. But I frankly have been bored of it since 11th grade. So I'm glad to be moving away from those kinds of writing assignments, and helping to try to create project-based experiences for kids that use writing, as a tool to accomplish something else, that are not just writing a paper for an audience of me. And I get that that's what our educational system is built on, but I've never loved it. So I'm sort of ripe for this, for the AI revolution, because it helps, like fast forward on project-based learning, which is something that I really believe in a lot. I guess I'm a little guilty saying that in this
I
company.
don't I don't think it's a I think it's a it's a different approach that leads to hopefully leads to a similar set of critical thinking skills um, from your graduates. I would take exception to one thing, that I think that a five paragraph essay or an essay like that, but once they get stretched out, it's just a model of the same thing getting longer. But that I don't think it's just for an audience of one. I think it's also it teaches thinking, and that and that the writing process is a way to learn what you think about the Grapes of Wrath
Right.
or whatever it is, and that has intrinsic value of its own. And I don't, and you've already made it clear that you think that too, like that it's just a question of how we get to that kind of critical thinking.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think there are fewer and fewer students, especially now, who will be open to that, which sucks. Sorry, excuse my French, which is unfortunate. But I think there are other kinds of composition that
Mhm.
can stretch those same muscles. And like I said, I do, a couple of podcast units in my English classes, not my college English class, my normal one, where, they interview their mentors that they have in their lives, and then they have to chop it up and integrate, narratives, and they have to figure out that editing process. And I believe the research that says, that kind of composition translates to every other type of composition, but has the added bonus of having um, like a larger audience, and so more intrinsic motivation for them to do it. Um, yeah, but I just don't think anything really hits that as hard as sitting and writing. Like, I don't know. So I am a believer in it, but I just think it's becoming less central to education. I don't know what that portends.
I don't think it's the downfall of Western civilization.
Good.
Historians struggle with this because we recognize that um, the vast majority of our students are not going to go into scholarship. And if I'm completely honest, I couldn't in good conscience suggest almost any of my students go to graduate school in history, given the job market and prospects. I mean, at some point or another, that would be unethical, which is just a painful point. This is where we are. And so that's why I've abandoned the sort of big research project and some other things like, big research, right? A paper kind of thing and things like that. Um, but, and that's led me to all kinds of experimentation. Um, I'd ask you both. What haven't you tried or haven't tried a lot of, but you'd like to try next? And let me um both in terms of what you think you might practically be able to do, like in a year or two, maybe in a week or two, or a year or two, and then if you were freed from the shackles of grading, of having to provide an assessment at the end of the semester, probably to an electronic system, which then converts it to a transcript, what would you like to try in terms of pedagogy that may integrate AI, that might go past AI?
Hmm.
I'm interested in the ways that generative AI can get better at helping with research in databases in particular. There's, it has the hallucination problem where it invents sources right now that are, it makes it almost impossible to use as a practical, like, let's look at writing center training manuals, and then it'll just invent something by a writing center person. And um, but surely that's going to end. I mean, maybe not, but and so that if and when these things get integrated into the existing academic databases, that I think could be a really useful way in, and it could function a lot like, you know, we don't do this as well in the humanities, but in the social sciences, there's always an abstract, and often there is in humanities too. But it could do the abstract work in the databases in a way that really speeds up the research process for uh, in the humanities, and I'm interested in seeing where that kind of thing goes. I'm not ready to get rid of the long research paper, um, but I am all for making it easier for students, especially as things get like um, we spend more time in our early early parts of our semester on like the close reading kind of work, um, and so which gives us less time for the research projects or papers at the end. Then no, that could really be a fruitful path.
For me, like I still do the big research paper or literature analysis paper, at the end of the semester. I have found a few tools that do that. I mean, they use ChatGPT, that large language model, as a basis, but they're directed towards the researchers, and they're, basically they try to mimic a really good literature review, and they're not bad at it. I mean, they probably leave stuff out, but it really helps because, as you know, you go into LexisNexis, or, well, I'm old school, not Lex, whatever it is, Ex Libris, or whatever you have access to now, and there's like 14,000 results. So you have to spend so much time, telling students how to hack the system and use Boolean operators and whatever, to get to the research they actually want. There are some pretty decent AI tools that help with that now. Far from perfect, but they're stepping in that direction. As far as things I want to try with my pedagogy, man, you mentioned silos. I mean, my big dream is like just the demolishment of silos, at least in the high school context. If we're going towards project-based learning, which my school's really embracing, New York State's embracing it now as like another pathway, outside the regents, to get your diploma. Like I want to work with my science teacher and my social studies teacher and the gym teacher, and I want to do big school-wide projects that have, that hit all the standards and skills that we want them to leave high school with, but I don't have to teach them in my little English classroom that's separate from all the other classrooms. I just don't think that I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I would be really interested in transitioning to a kind of school that has sort of pathways for different interests, but doesn't have like ELA classes and specific science classes and other classes. There are like schools that have just tracks, and the classes and teaching kind of blend together. I'd love to go there, but I mean, I'm not going to get there anytime soon.
And there's efforts in higher education to do similar things, which encounter all sorts of, before you even get to sort of active resistance by members of the community, you just get to significant logistical issues, right? Scheduling and, things like that, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The thing that strikes me as useful, especially interdisciplinary ways, or through the a core curriculum, would be working on the stuff that Colin's teaching his students to do, like how to ask the questions the right way. Like it's a particular kind of writing. Like you can get some very bad answers because you're asking very bad questions. And so as you work with it and play with it, it could, be a way to teach it. It's a different kind of critical thinking than what I have done traditionally, and one that I'm a little resistant to. But it's not unreasonable to think that, learning how to speak to a large language model could, then create a series of ways to address all kinds of critical thinking kinds of questions. So I saw, I think I saw Marianne here. And so in a philosophy setting, like how do you talk to a large language model like a philosopher? And what does it then return? And does it sound like a philosopher, or do I need to do something? Do I need to talk to it in a different way in order to then decide what it's giving me the response to? And there's a lot of ways that could be a useful skill for students. Like it's very easy for me to see like the kind of like on the ground practical. I need to write. I'm a paralegal and I need to write a contract. I'm like, great, go do it. It's harder for me to see the critical thinking direction of things, which I know is there. It's just it's it's something I don't have a ton of. I mean, obviously, none of us have a ton of training in this. It's all new, but it's harder for me to see quickly.
Yeah. I think that like one thing you brought up, it just made me think of like, this idea of using the fact that AI is a robot and how helpful that can be in certain contexts. Because I think that we, sometimes I don't know how my students are feeling, and I don't know how my delivery is being taken. And then my student wants to do something that I'm happy with, right? Because they're fearing, or not fearing, but like they're concerned with my judgment because I'm a human being. But I think about learning Spanish, for example, and how amazing it is now that people can talk to an AI version of like a Spanish language tutor and not be scared of messing up because it's not a human. So they're freed to like make these mistakes they wouldn't make with us. I think that's amazing. I've been practicing my admittedly rusty Spanish. And one of the things that I always think about is like, if I'm in a Spanish speaking country and have decent Spanish, I'm always terrified of messing up. But AI removes the terror, and it enables, I think, students to grow in that way. And I'm sure there's other ways that teacher judgment, or that sort of I don't know, just feeling the eyes of the teacher on you or whatever is removed. And I think that could be, I know that's one positive use case that I've seen, that I'd like to explore a little more of that too, because I give my students feedback, but they don't always give me a straight answer about what they want, because they want to say that they want what I want. And does that make sense to you? That concern doesn't necessarily exist with a bot.
On the same, I agree with you, but on the same hand, or a different hand, opposite, I don't know which it is. I don't, I'm always concerned when students start to think of the AI as not a robot, like as if it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like, like it's not, doesn't have feelings. It doesn't think. It's processing words in a way that that then makes sense to us in a particular kind of way, and that is a thing that that worries me.
Yeah. There's a whole conversation about are AIs too agreeable
Yeah,
to the point where you can bully them into saying to agreeing that 2 + 2 = 5, and so can that be taken too far? Yeah. So, and this is probably a good sort of segue to wrap up as we're at the end of the hour, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to reflect on and say what you think our message as teachers in the classroom should be to administrators, to administration, about what are the implications of AI for teaching that they need to think about insofar as resources, insofar as planning, these sorts of things. Colin?
So we started this year with professional development session actually led by AJ Giuliani, mostly based on AI. And I would say that that was great because our administration understood that we needed time to think through this and explore those positive use cases and also explore the dangers that come with it. So my message to administration in higher education, secondary education, all the way down to kindergarten is please give us time and opportunities to explore these tools, give us professional resources, and most of all time and freedom to be able to explore this with our students, because we need to be able to understand it. And if we let other educational sort of flavors of the month, which is very common in high school, there's like a new PD every other day. So if we line up those and we forget to give teachers time to process this, we're not going to be using it in a thoughtful way. So time and support for our explorations is what I would say.
yeah, I agree, and I would caution our administration against jumping on something because it's shiny and new. That it has real potential, and it's fascinating, but that we need to be able to let it happen organically. I don't know if that's the right word in this case, but let it happen through the same way that research happens in a lot of ways, a lot of places, and stumble across something accidentally that works really well, even if it's not what you're shooting for, or let a project fail that doesn't work out. And and those are things that we could really, given the space and freedom to try these experiments with students and let them blow up in our face or let them succeed, would be an important step to things to do. My biggest concern is the flavor of the month thing, though, is that what, 10 or 15 years ago, maybe not quite that long, but 10 or 12 years ago, it was iPads in the classroom. Everybody had to have an iPad in the classroom. And an iPad's fine. It's not a very useful writing tool, though. Like, it's hard to type on. It's really a device to read and play games on, and great, read and play games on it, but it doesn't help a high school classroom that much. And so, but I knew, my wife was a teacher at the time, and they jumped on it, and they got the early, I think, second iPad or something, and all these students had it, and it was kind of a mess. And so, I'm sure that's been true of things going back to the typewriter. I mean, before that.
Well, Dr. Graham Stowe, Colin Dabkowski, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight and giving us your thoughts on where we are in high school and in university pedagogy, specifically focused on writing. We're hoping to continue the conversations on AI series probably into the winter on Zoom, and then we'll maybe reconvene on campus in the spring when we're sure we are free and clear of blizzards and snowstorms and that sort of thing. But thank you so much for your time tonight.